Hello, my name is Andrew Sears, and I'm the president of City University, and I'm the instructor for MTM 506, Technology, Life Balance, and Addiction. I'm going to just give you an overview for week one for this course. First, just to tell you a little bit about myself. I married, have two kids, Zeke and Ezra. And I think one of the most significant things about me relative to this course is that I've been in recovery for about 19 years now, both for technology and non-technology related addictions. Um, and I'll tell you more of my story, but a little bit of it is, there's always that old hair club for men commercial where he said, "I'm not only the owner but also a customer." I would say that the same thing applies for me. I'm not only the president of the university, but I've also been, using this recovery for the past 19 years. So if you have questions in the course, you can email me at andrew@cityvision.edu or give me a call. Generally, my preference is probably email first. So I want to start off and tell you why we developed this course. I've actually been, working on technology addictions and trying to help treat them and help others, protect others from them for a number of years. We had a big grant about 9 years ago from the U.S. Department of Justice to protect kids online from both predators and pornography, protect adults from pornography addiction. And we also have our addiction studies program here at City Vision University, and we're trying to apply a lot of those principles into the background of technology. Now, my own background, just to tell you a little bit more, I grew up in inner city Kansas City, and I often describe my background as being similar to the artist Eminem, except if someone from that background ended up going to school at MIT. And while I was at MIT, I co-founded a research group with one of the fathers of the internet, focused on how the internet's changing the world, and then essentially had a life burnout. While at MIT, realized my heart was more for the city, and basically have spent my life ever since. I guess my started in 1996 on this journey back. And for those of you who've seen the movie Good Will Hunting, I would say that my life story is actually pretty similar to that movie too. But I'll share more of it through the course. So the goals of this course, and one of the dominant themes in this course, is going to be the concept of media nutrition. And part of the reason why you use that is everyone is familiar with the idea of nutrition of food, and a lot of the same principles that you would use in consuming food are also apply in how you consume media. So one of the things we're going to do is that we're going to train students to be able to monitor media usage, set boundaries with technology, ensure your own sobriety, and having a healthy diet of media, technology, and relationships. And as you do that, most nutritionists, they're given assignments on how do they make themselves healthy. And then they're able to train others. So that's what we're trying to do, is to help you get healthy, help you learn those tools so that you can train others. So that's a big part of the goal of this course. The other, so that you understand the different forms of technology-related addictions, but also that you can communicate the causes of technology-related addictions. Then the third is just reflection on how technology-related addiction and media have affected you yourself. The fourth is around boundaries in recovery. So that is developing a plan for yourself and others. And this really gets into the final project, where you're going to be focused on, how do you get resources, strategy, technology, tools to protect both yourself, families, communities. And then ultimately for people who have serious addictions, to look into treatment. And to understand what are the resources that are available to help you or others if you're facing technology-related addictions, both through peer support groups and in different ministry contacts or professional counseling. So that's the introduction of the goals of the course. Everything in the course you should know is really evaluated on, did you achieve those goals? So, people sometimes they're saying, why did I get a C in the course? Well, did you really achieve those goals? Can you demonstrate that at the end of this course that you're able to do those things really well? That's ultimately what's going to be determining your grade. So with that, I'm going to get into the actual course materials for week one. One of the most famous quotes around technology is by Alan Kay. It's that technology is anything invented after you were born, and everything else is just stuff. And a big part of that is just recognizing that how we understand technology is significantly cultural. So just as an example, so I borrowed this from John Dyer. Going all the way back to the advent of agriculture, that was a new technology. And then you had writing. And there's actually a big debate between Socrates and was it Aristotle or Plato? Socrates and Plato over, whether writing is a bad technology. And Socrates was very against the idea of writing, and Plato wasn't. And fortunately, Plato wrote down all the stuff that Socrates said, but we don't have any writings of Socrates because he was anti-writing. And then, Jesus came around. There's lots of technologies, up to that. But then, since then in the church, you've had various things that affected the church. You had the clock, that set prayer times. You had the books that, really made the Bible available and in many ways made possible the Protestant Reformation. And whenever books first came, there was big debates over, whether books were bad. And, in a lot of schools, they thought that all instructors had to write their own books. So, the things that are happening now have always happened throughout history. You had the photograph, microphone, telephone, cars, airplanes, air conditioning, the home computer, then the internet, cell phone, Facebook, iPhone. And depending on when you're born, for many of you, your parents, you would say, all these things up to whatever age isn't technology. But then, say you're born in the 60s or 70s, then what you're going to do is you're going to say, things that were developed after you were born, but before you became, an older adult, are things that are considered cool. So for me, I was born in 1973. So computers are cool, the internet's cool, cell phones are cool. But a lot of people think all these newfangled things. Facebook's going to be the end of the world, iPhone's going to be the end of the world. But really, it depends on when you're born. So for me, I think that computers are not necessarily technology because I grew up with them. But then other people, they grew up with Facebook. They grew up with iPhones. My kids grew up with iPads. So what's cool for them significantly changes. And really, that is where the conflict is. It's a generational conflict around technology, and it's over the fact that some people think certain technologies are cool because they're growing up with them, and other people think that they're the end of the world. So there's going to be other things that will be foreign even for kids that are, born today. Will it be jetpacks or teleporters? We don't really know. But, one of the languages that people are often using to talk about this cultural difference is the concept of digital natives and digital immigrants. So you have immigrants to a country, and often you describe them as first generation or second generation. First generation may or may not learn the language. Second generation often will, be born learning the language of a new country. So that's where this concept of digital native. So you grew up with a given technology and fluent in a given technology. And my leaning is actually that each person is going to be digital natives with, or be, technology natives with certain technologies, and they're going to be immigrants with other technologies. So depending on how, much a part of your culture and how fluent you become in that culture. So there's this divide, this generational divide between the digital natives and digital immigrants. And the digital immigrants didn't grow up with the technology and aren't fluent with the technology. And I like to draw the analogy between the rural to urban migration, because there's really been three major waves in history. So you had the agricultural boom, and that allowed, for rural development. But then ultimately we had the industrial boom that, enabled urban development. And a lot of, our students are familiar with the urban realities and the changes. But then now we're going through this third wave, some people call it the information age. Um, and we're transitioning to this online digital world. And I just want to share a little bit of stats in this. If you look at the story of the Bible, it starts in a garden, but it ends in a city. And if you look at world history, that's actually what the trajectory of the world has been, where it used to be everyone was rural. That's the green line. And somewhere right around 2006 or 2007, the majority of the world started to be in urban areas. And by 2050, it's going to be 70% of the world in urban areas. And you have this big cultural shift that happens from rural to urban. So a lot of people understand that. The same things happen with this migration into the digital world. So this is a chart that shows the percentage of people online. The top line is the developed world, where 77% of people are online. And even in the developing world, it's going up dramatically. But that's one way of looking at it. Do you have access to the internet? But I think the more important is actually, how is media being used? So if you look at media consumption, and in the 1940s, people spent about 20 hours per week in media, but it was mainly through print and cinema. And then all of a sudden you had the growth of television. So you're getting 50 hours per week, starting in the 80s, and then you're adding the internet and digital TV, and all of a sudden, people are projecting that by 2020 you're going to be spending between 80 and 90 hours per week, and that's actually more of the hours. I think there's only 172 hours in a week, more than half of the hours, including your sleeping hours that you're going to be spending in media. So that's a pretty dramatic shift. And a third way of visualizing the shift is, this is the actually the Pope, and I think this is the Pope, the new Pope in 2005, and you can see there's one person there with a cell phone, taking a picture in 2005, and this is a picture of the same location in 2013, and you can see that everybody has their cell phone out, and that's only 8 years difference. So you have this massive shift happening in technology, but we're not, the urban shift happened over hundreds and hundreds of years, but this shift to the information age is happening, much quicker. And what's happening is, in here at City Vision, we study urban ministry, and that's one of our big programs. And there's lessons that you learn in, urbanization, and cities create new problems and opportunities. And a lot of part of the problem that happens in urbanization is a lot of rural parents will not be fluent in parenting in urban children. So the typical story is, you get a naive rural individual, they come to the city, they quickly get robbed, then their kids get caught up in gangs and drugs, and I know that story because I grew up in inner city Kansas City. Both my parents were raised in rural environments, and when you're on the farm, you can just let your kids go unsupervised outside, and in my neighborhood, my parents just let us run free, but they didn't know that I was spending all my time with, people whose houses were drug dealers, and all my friends, having sex in elementary school and doing drugs in elementary school. And the reality is these parents didn't have the skills they needed to parent in a city, and often that happens, in moving between countries. And what I've done is, so I'm raising my kids in urban areas, and I know the risk, and I know how to moderate those risks because I'm fluent in urban culture. And we've had hundreds of urban interns here in the city in Boston. We always tell them, walk down these streets, don't walk down those streets. If you're raising your kids in an urban environment, the solution isn't just to say, urban's all bad or just to move to the suburbs. We're called to be a part of the world, but not of it. So what needs to happen is you need to have a balanced urban culture. You need to become street savvy. You need to, be aware of what kids are involved, and we need new models of ministry. So that's why there's these schools like City Vision that train people in urban ministry. We have schools in addiction studies that we're training in the new, models of ministry that's needed. So the same thing applies for virtualization. You have the online world. It's presenting new problems and opportunities. The opportunity is the world's information's at your fingertips, but then you have all sorts of problems. And then you have digital immigrant parents that aren't fluent in parenting their digital native children. It's just like the parents who let their kids run free in the city, not realizing that their whole street's covered with drug dealers. You let them go online, and there's pornographies, there's pedophiles, there's all sorts of things, and kids are getting addicted to games, and the parents don't realize the risk. So what's really needed is a balanced parenting where the parents are digitally fluent, and avoiding this. Essentially, it's an ethnocentric view where you're saying all tech's bad. I remember having a friend growing up who his parents never let him play a video game. And he was an outcast because he wasn't a part of the culture of other kids. And I don't think that we're called to withdraw necessarily to that extent. But what happens with those kids is once they get out on their own, then often they're like sheep before wolves because they haven't learned the balance. So that's the extreme kind of avoidance. And then there's other parents that just let their kids do anything online. There's a child I saw recently. He's 4 years old, and he was playing a game that was NC-17 that was basically about mass murdering. And I just thought their parents, Christian parents, had no idea. And kids are being exposed to this stuff. So the reality is, to be a good parent, to be a good minister, you got to be fluent in the language. So you move to another country that speaks a different language, and you can't speak that language, you're not going to be very effective in ministry. Same thing. In this case, though, your country's language is changing. It's changing to a digital culture, and we need to develop that. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do in this course. So there's a lot of opportunities and threats from technology for both digital natives and digital immigrants. So I want to talk about the opportunities and the threats. So one of the biggest things is that technology creates more options, but one of the in more connections. So Facebook, you have 1,000 friends, but the problem is that they're shallow, and you don't have as much focus. So opportunities, we're becoming more and more diverse of a country, of a world, but there's also a growth of deviance. People are saying, then we should allow everything. You have access to more information, the world's courses, the world's education, but then there's access to the world's pornography and temptation. You have a decrease happening actually of global poverty that's largely being driven by technology, but you also have more inequality happening domestically. And that's part of what I talked about in my dissertation. You have decreased autocracy, so it's much harder to be a dictator these days, and you're seeing a lot of the turmoil that's happening in the Middle East, a lot of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think became more and more challenging with technology. But you're also seeing decreased accountability. So it's harder to hold anyone accountable. You're seeing a lot of growth of megachurches that often use technology, but then you're having this Walmartization or McDonaldization effect of churches. You have viral church growth. The church is growing more now than it ever has in history. But you also have cults. Cults are growing more now than they ever have in history. You have increased specialization happening in the world, but then you have, and in ministries, but you also have a decrease in holistic focused churches. And overall, the summary is that you have an increased capacity for good, but also you have an increased capacity for evil. And a lot of these things are being driven by technology. This is what technology is enabling. So the question is, what do you do? I think really the summary is that since eating the tree of knowledge and good and evil, mankind has been increasing in its knowledge of good, that's the left side, and evil. And the question is, how do we maximize the strengths of the left side while offsetting the weaknesses? Well, this course, a lot of the other courses we have in our master's program focus on the strengths. This course is really focused on the threats. How do we deal with these? And one of the core ideas behind this course and behind City Vision is the idea of incarnational ministry. So Jesus, God could have only sent the Bible, and he could have just had a download and said, here's the gospel, and that's it. But God sent Jesus to be incarnational. And one of the philosophies that's often used that is summarized by it's actually misquoted by Paul, but the general idea is true, that Paul said, I became a Jew to the Jew and a Greek to the Greeks. And the idea is we need to be bicultural in the world. We're becoming a more and more multicultural world, and in whatever context you're in, you need to be fluent in that context. So there's a question of how do we do that in the technology world? Well, I like to say we need to be a Jew to the Jew and a geek to the geek. Now, some people would say their image of Jesus looks something like this, and that Jesus was, the first techie, and actually the word used to describe Jesus is tekton, which is where our word from technology also comes, and Jesus was a carpenter. And I've had some people say this is an offensive image of Jesus, but I've also seen people say that they don't like white images of Jesus or black images of Jesus or Chinese images of Jesus. I think Jesus looks like how we are. So if you're a techie and you're more from a more Anglo background, this might be the picture of Jesus that as you understand them. If you are a African American techie, you might have a black Jesus with glasses. But I think that the point is that Jesus meets us where we are, so we should meet others where they are, and we should meet the techies where they are. So there's the question of, are we doing incarnational ministry among digital natives? So are we becoming bilingual, bicultural by immersing ourselves in their culture? Or are we avoiding it? If we're avoiding it, then, we're just essentially passing judgment. Are we meeting them where they are? Are we forcing them to meet us on our cultural terms? Are we preparing them to live in a world we grew up in or the world they will grow up in? And what is the indigenous leadership development of Christian leaders in technology? What should we be doing in that space?